Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Throughout today, we'll be hearing from heads of state and government and other colleagues, which will be intervening from the room or via video. But first and foremost, I'd like to open proceedings with a song. Christophe Maé and Youssou N'Dour decided to demonstrate their commitment through a song. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to perform, and then I'll give you the floor.
Laisse-moi seul, je suis pas d'humeur. Je suis bouillant comme l'équateur. Posé sur quelques mètres carrés. J'ai beau hurler, mais y'a personne pour m'aider. Laisse-moi seul, je te dis, j'ai pas le cœur. La saison des amours se meurt. Je suis qu'un tolard à ciel ouvert. Regarde, on dirait un clochard des mers. Ça devient chaud, j'en perds le nord, j'en perds l'Arctique. J'entends des voix venues d'Afrique.
Aduna mom sedena Afrika joglin bolok Wayen ci kaw ñu dégg seen baat ñun ñoo fa
Laisse-moi seul sous ma grande ours. Aujourd'hui, je donne pas cher de ma peau à la bourse. Je me traîne une drôle d'allure. Je fais de la peine à voir dans ma fourrure. C'est plus le grand froid chez moi, y a plus d'hiver. Et elle s'enlève pas ma polaire. Un jour, les seuls ours blancs seront les peluches de vos enfants. Ça devient chaud, j'en perds le nord, j'en perds l'Arctique. J'entends des voix venues d'Afrique.
Aduna mom sedena Afrika joglin bolok Wayen ci kaw ñu dégg seen baat ñun ñoo fa Aduna mom sedena Afrika joglin bolok
Africa, children, bolo.
Wayen ci kaw ñu dégg seen baat
Weren chico, ño de December.
ñun ñoo fa
Je meurs de chaud dans ma fourrure. Je n'enlève pas moi ma polaire. Je meurs de faim, je te le jure, sur la vie de ma mère. Laisse-moi seul de toute façon. Y'a plus la place sur mon glaçon.
Bravo et merci infiniment à tous.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to both of you. I can see Youssou N'Dour up on the screen. Where are you? I'm in Dakar. Oh, yes, I can see in the background. Thank you. Christophe, over to you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, what can I say? As an artist, I'm very lucky to be here, to be heard, and in fact, I'm delighted and I feel very honored to be here today. This song takes stock of the facts of climate change. I think what's important is to raise awareness so that we all shoulder our responsibility to protect the environment. For my part, I've tried to show that all continents have been affected and Africa has been particularly hard hit. The images taken by Yana Bertrand, which are part of the clip, are very important. And I'm also, of course, delighted to be sharing the spotlight with Youssou N'Dour, who's very committed to the cause and to Africa. Thank you. Youssou, over to you. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Mr. President, Christophe, my dear friend, Christophe put it well when he said that music is not just about entertaining people. We're also aware that great strength lies in music, and through music we can help make headway. We can educate people, we can raise awareness. Paris, COP21, of course, there's the objective of scaling back climate change, but the world has changed. Thus, I'm of the view that it's important to bring everyone together, politicians, financiers, musicians. Everyone can mount a response to this new world in which we need more solidarity, much more solidarity. So I'm very delighted with the song, which I had the pleasure of singing together with my friend, Christophe Maé, and he's a great fan of Africa. He often tells me that, for instance, he's in a taxi somewhere in Senegal and he's listening to local music. He tells me all about his favorite local artists. I think it's a shining example of North-South cooperation. So we want to carry the following message. Africa needs more support, Mr. President. Because pollution, of course, it has an impact. And this pollution, although we're the ones being affected by it, comes from the rich countries. And therefore, I agree with everything you said this morning regarding cancellation of the debt of the poorest African countries, with certain conditions, of course. That's what we're after, cancelling that debt. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Thank you, Youssou. Thank you both. Thank you very much for the song and for your commitment. You said it. Africa needs this. But I believe we're on an equal footing as we take on this commitment. It's important to underscore that. Thank you very much for your commitment, for bringing together all of these various strands of climate issues. We're going to be discussing all of them today. It's not just about public policy. There's a lot of emotion. It's inspirational, both of you. Thank you very much once again. Thank you, Mr. President.
That's it.
Bien, donc nous passons maintenant au travail.
Very well. Let's get down to work. Following that musical introduction, once again, thank you to both artists. We know that there are public health restrictions in place. Therefore, it's very difficult for musicians to record their songs, and therefore it's all the more symbolic that Christophe Maé and Youssou N'Dour were with us today. Culture, of course, contributes to the very meaning of our lives. UN Secretary General, President of the World Bank Group, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'm delighted that many of you made it to Paris and are sitting in the room with me today. Thank you to all those who are going to be joining us this afternoon. We have a very full agenda today, so I'll keep my comments brief. And I will be keeping an eye on the time so that we proceed at pace. However, we are going to be addressing some vital issues. The mobilization kick-started by the One Planet Summit is very important. You know, the first edition took place in Paris back in December 2017, and it set the following objective: consolidate our action, our collaboration, our commitments, and a system of monitoring was also set up to ensure that we followed up, to ensure that everything translated into concrete results. And today, we do want to say that the link between humanity, nature, the environment which we live in has been thrown into stark relief. 2 years ago, IPBES, the IPCC for biodiversity, has been working very hard, and 2 years ago, they introduced their first global assessment chronicling the overexploitation of our planet's resources, serious degradation of our land and marine resources, species extinction, and the facts are undeniable. We all know what they are. What we know today is that current crises have made all the more obvious that all of our vulnerabilities are inextricably linked. There's been a lot of pressure has been put on nature by human activity, amplifying inequality, threatening our health and our security. And this is why we need to transform our development model. That's vital. What we know is that we can move the dial if we decide to do so. Everyone has felt that, seeing how, when human activity as we know it temporarily ground to a halt, how nature reasserted its rights on our coastlines, even in the middle of cities. And this feeling is by no means trivial. It hammered home the reality of the situation, which we forget all too often. Our future and that of our planet depend on what we do here and now. It is incumbent upon us to do it. We have the means to do it. It's in our interests. The UN has told us this. Opportunities are emerging in nature. They could create 191 million jobs by 2030. Forests, oceans, and ecosystems should remain intact. Thus, they can become effective carbon sinks, which will help us meet our climate targets. Nature offers solutions for developing sustainable agriculture, for economic and financial services, helping us to preserve our heritage, our heritages, our cultures. The solutions are in nature. Thus, what we want to achieve is large-scale synergies, fighting climate change, combating large-scale famine, which has reached outsized proportions as things stand, also stabilizing ecosystems with a view to achieving development. We'll return to that a little later. What we want to do is to take collective action, signing up to transformational, concrete, verifiable commitments. And there's going to be public and private sector actors involved, the state sector and civil society. The commitments we took on in 2017 have allowed us to start taking action. Together with the UN, we set the Aichi targets back in 2010. A decade has gone past, and the facts are undeniable. Not a single one of the 20 Aichi targets have been implemented, such as putting an end to species extinction or cutting pollution. And we have to face up to this failure and to learn its lessons. We need to do this so as to speed up our efforts and also ensure that we monitor the situation. Kickstarting 2021 with the One Planet Summit is very important because we have so many major events which will be taking place, such as the September event in Marseille, the Kunming COP15, the COP in Glasgow, where we'll be discussing the fight against climate change. So quite a few COP events taking place in 2021, spearheaded by the UN Secretary General, and with the involvement of all of our partners, our friends, all members of the international community. For that reason, we decided to get the ball rolling this year with 4 key priorities for action. First of all, protecting land and maritime species, so that we chart a course for nature to regenerate by protecting 30% of the Earth's land and 30% of its seas and oceans. This is all the more important because unless we preserve ecosystems, we won't be able to shoulder our climate commitments. Second, agroecology. That's absolutely vital to ensure that we can protect the environment, ensure food security, and reduce inequality. This will allow us to transform our collective development model, to overhaul it. We'll be talking about that a little later as well. Third, mobilizing public and private financing. This is one of the sinews of war for biodiversity and climate alike. And fourth, protecting climate forests, tropical forests, species, and human health. In the summer of 2019, fires ravaged the Amazon. This was a wake-up call for all of humanity, alerting us to the need to protect tropical forests. In Africa and Latin America, that's what we did, but we need to build on these efforts, to go faster, to go further, because this is one of the things that the pandemic has taught us, that our planet's health is very much linked with the health of humanity, global health. Those are the key points I wanted to make in my introductory remarks. A lot of commitments, a lot of key steps, mobilization, but we will also be painstakingly monitoring the commitments we take on. Thank you very much for all of your efforts. There aren't that many people in the room because of the public health restrictions, but I do want to thank you all, parliamentarians, heads of international organizations, of course, heads of state and government, that goes without saying, but other actors working out in the field who, for many years now, in their everyday lives, have been putting everything I said into practice. I won't take up any more of your time, and I'd now like to give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
2021 must be the year to reconcile humanity with nature. Until now, we have been destroying our planet. We have been abusing it as if we had a spare one. Our current resource use requires almost 2 planets, but we only have one. If we compare Earth's history to a calendar year, we have used 1/3 of its natural resources in the last 0.2 seconds. We have been poisoning air, land and water, and filling oceans with plastic. And now nature is striking back. Temperatures are reaching record highs, biodiversity is collapsing, deserts are spreading, fire, floods, and hurricanes are more frequent and extreme, and we are extremely fragile. Meanwhile, COVID-19 has taken more than 1.8 million lives and devastated economies. And for the first time in this century, poverty is increasing, and inequalities are deepening, and as we rebuild, we cannot revert to the old normal. Pandemic recovery is our chance to change course. With smart policies and the right investments, we can chart a path that brings health to all, revives economies, and builds resilience and rescues biodiversity. Innovations in energy and transport can steer a sustainable recovery and economic and social transformation. And nature-based solutions, such as the Africa's Great Green Wall, are especially promising. Preserving the world's biodiversity also yields jobs. According to the World Economic Forum, emerging business opportunities across nature could create 191 million jobs by 2030. But the world has not met any of the global biodiversity targets set for 2020, and biodiversity is facing a financial gap of $711 billion per year until 2030. Sustainable financing is essential if you are to transition away from polluting sectors. Our meeting in Kunming, the COP in China this year, is a vital step in establishing a post-2020 global framework for biodiversity and stopping the extinction of crises. Chers amis,
dear friends, biodiversity and climate are closely linked, and a new impetus is being formed. Many major polluters are starting to have net zero emissions for 2050. The main goal is to build a true worldwide coalition for carbon neutrality. Each country, city, and company has to have an ambitious roadmap to meet zero net emissions by 2050. Time has come to put a price on carbon, to stop building new coal-fired plants, to end subsidies for fossil fuels, to transfer the tax burden from taxpayers to polluters, and to align public and private financial flows with the commitments of the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. We also need to integrate the carbon neutrality goal in all of our economic and tax decisions. And we must help the weakest, those who are already suffering from the effects of climate change and the loss of biodiversity. Today, efforts for adaptation only represent 20% of climate funding, and only 14% of climate finance is earmarked for the least advanced countries. This is more than insufficient, especially if we want to protect small island states whose very existence is threatened. Everyone needs to do more, much more. COP26 cannot be another lost opportunity, nor can the Kunming meeting be one. For the last 3 years, the One Planet Summit has allowed us to bring together public, private, and civil society players around concrete initiatives at country level and world level. The Coalition for Nature and People, the very ambitious one which will be launched today, is a perfect example of this. Dear friends, we are starting a new year under the sign of hope. Together, we can seize this opportunity to create a safer, fairer, and more sustainable world. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Antonia, for those remarks and for your deep conviction, which we can all hear. And now David Malpass for the World Bank. You have the floor, President Malpass.
David, your mic is on mute.
Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Macron, dear Emmanuel, Antonio, Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, I'm very pleased to convene this year's One Planet Summit. Emmanuel, I want to make sure the sound is all right. Am I okay to continue?
On t'entend. This is okay.
Oh, okay. The World Bank was very pleased to co-convene the One Planet Summit in Paris in 2017, in New York in 2018, and in Nairobi in 2019. So I want to thank you, President Macron, and France for your leadership and commitment to the climate and biodiversity agenda. Climate change and the loss of biodiversity are defining issues of our time. They present critical challenges to our development efforts, including reducing poverty and inequality. This year presents many opportunities for countries to align their biodiversity and climate goals with development programs, including through COP15 in Kunming and COP26 in Glasgow in November. It's important that we support developing countries in achieving their NDCs, helping them develop long-term strategies for low carbon and climate resilient economies, end their reliance on coal, and address biodiversity loss. The World Bank Group is the biggest multilateral funder of climate investments in developing countries, with record commitments last fiscal year, and we intend to go further. Last month, I announced an ambitious target for the World Bank Group for 35% of our financing to have climate co-benefits on average over the next 5 years. This will help countries rebuild greener and with more resilience, for instance, through low carbon infrastructure and more environmentally friendly agricultural practices. We will also maintain a strong emphasis on climate adaptation, with the goal of it accounting for at least 50% of World Bank climate finance. In addition, the World Bank Group has supported operations focused on biodiversity conservation for 3 decades, conserving species and natural habitats, and working to improve livelihoods for people in sectors that rely on natural capital, including forestry, fisheries, and agriculture. We will continue to ramp up our biodiversity work and the sustainable management of terrestrial, coastal, and marine ecosystems. Over the last 2 years, we have supported the creation and consolidation of more than 100 million hectares of marine and coastal protected areas, along with 10 million hectares of terrestrial protected areas in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In India, our operations supported mapping the entire coastline and planting 16,000 hectares of mangroves that offer protection during extreme weather. All of this helps improve the coastal livelihoods of 1.7 million people. Almost all of our new lending in China is toward global public goods, especially the reduction of marine plastics. In West Africa, our program is fighting coastal erosion, bringing back livelihoods. And as you'll hear later, we're scaling up our support to restore degraded land across Africa's dry lands in the Sahel, Lake Chad, and the Horn of Africa regions. COVID-19 has shown the linkages between human and planetary health. With Germany's support, we are doing new research into the investments and policies that will help to drive the One Health approach to preventing emerging infectious diseases. As countries build back, we must work together, the private sector, civil society, governments, institutions like our own, and communities, to support a green, inclusive, and resilient recovery. It's very clear we cannot succeed in helping countries reduce poverty and inequality without rising to the challenges of climate change and the loss of biodiversity. Thank you very much, President Macron.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, David, dear President, for this commitment. And I think we've seen here the need to set a clear collective framework, and in particular, to make COP15 a success and orient our action toward concrete results. Let me now give the floor to the first Vice Prime Minister of the Popular Republic of China, who will have a video recording for us, Mr. Han Zhang.
尊敬的马克龙总统，女士们、先生们、朋友们，2020年是极不平凡的一年。新冠肺炎疫情为世界带来巨大冲击。
COVID-19 has hard hit our people. That has made us understand deeply how our people are interdependent. At this beginning of the year, organizing a One Planet Summit has particular significance. There is only one planet Earth, and we are all living in a joint home. To bring about the sustainable development of humanity, we need to live in harmony with nature. To have a clean and beautiful planet, an open and inclusive planet. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, China will welcome COP15 to Kunming this year. An international framework of biodiversity for the world after 2020 will be worked out in the perspective of conserving biodiversity for the 10 years to come. To build a shared future for everyone alive on our planet, we need to work together and do so quickly to bring about a fruitful meeting.
要走合作共赢之路，共促框架谈判进程。生物多样性问题。
Conservation of biodiversity is a planetary challenge, which calls for an international response. Seeing the virus continuing to spread, those concerned must figure out how to work in the same direction so as to accelerate negotiations.
是兼备之路，制定科学有效的目标。在阿尔兹目标落实进展的经验和基础上，科学研究和制定2020年后行动目标。
We should allow ourselves to orient our actions to the long term and have them be reasonable and applicable. We need to pursue joint progress.
发展中国家在保护生物多样性方面面临资金。
Developing countries lack finance and skills to conserve biodiversity. To have an effective application of the post-2020 framework, the international community should mobilize more resources and strengthen the application of them so as to help developing countries reinforce their capacities, build their capacities. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, in the light of Xi Jinping thought on environmental progress, China has brought about remarkable things in ecological protection. We have set red lines for the protection of our ecosystems, established a system of national parks, and implemented major conservation projects for biodiversity. Our earth and sea-based ecosystems have greatly improved. 2021 will be the beginning of the 14th five-year plan for China. And we will have a new march toward the construction of a modern socialist country at all levels. We will pursue quality development and continue to improve the environment so as to build a beautiful China. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, as the adage says, those who act succeed. Those who go first arrive first. Building a shared future for all of us will require a collective effort. China, host country of COP15, will ensure a good preparation of that meeting. We'll be happy to welcome you to Kunming as soon as possible, to find the best ways and means to protect world biodiversity and start a new process of world governance for biodiversity.
Thank you very much for those opening remarks. I would now like to hand over to His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales. I wish to thank you once again for taking part in this event and for your steadfast commitment. You have the floor, Your Royal Highness.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen,
je suis très touché d'avoir été invité à me joindre à vous tous au début de cette année d'espoir.
To take part in this event, this One Planet Summit with you. And it is of vital importance, this event. I cannot but congratulate you, Mr. President, for seizing this opportunity to galvanize our ambition, which is also very tangible as we are seeking to address the critical challenges our planet is confronting, which we're all confronting.
We have made a degree of progress in forging consensus on the direction humanity must take and the milestones we must meet by the middle of the century. Our hope is that these milestones can be elaborated still further in the Convention on Biological Diversity conference in China later this year and at COP26 in the United Kingdom in November. However, consensus and intention, goals and targets are only the first steps. The next, although long overdue, must be an extraordinary practical effort to mobilize the financial resources, technical ingenuity, and institutional innovation required to pursue them. This is why a year ago at Davos, I launched my Sustainable Markets Initiative to put people and planet at the heart of global value creation. It was born of my heartfelt belief that the only possible solution to the challenges facing our planet lies in working in harmony with nature's own economy rather than against it. En janvier dernier, aucun d'entre nous.
In January of last year, none of us could have imagined the devastating pandemic which was on the cusp of unfurling, nor could we have imagined the terrible impact this has had on lives and livelihoods the world over. Today, as we cast our minds back on everything we have gone through together, it's now clear more than ever that human health and planetary health are inextricably linked. Over the past year, through my initiative, the Sustainable Markets Initiative, I have brought together global leaders within the framework of a voluntary coalition. They represented all of the various industries and sectors, almost every branch of the economy. And I challenged them to find a way to place our planet on a more sustainable trajectory.
I am making an urgent appeal to leaders from all sectors and from around the world to join us in this endeavor and to give their support to this Terra Carta to bring prosperity into harmony with nature, people, and planet over the coming decade. I can only encourage in particular those in industry and finance to provide practical leadership to this common project, as only they are able to mobilize the innovation, scale, and resources that are required to transform our global economy. While the Terra Carta outlines 10 areas for action, with our focus today, a key area must be accelerating the transition of carbon-intensive land use and scaling investment in the restoration of natural capital. Les solutions basées sur la nature.
Nature-based solutions, such as soil restoration, forest and grassland restoration, restoration of wetlands and agricultural lands, are a conduit for us to restore biodiversity, all the while cutting emissions through creating natural carbon sinks, offsetting carbon emissions, as well as investment in natural capital. All of these measures could have a substantive impact, allowing us to create the necessary capital to implement all of our objectives at scale. For instance, carbon offset markets based on nature could help us to significantly reduce emissions, as a growing number of companies are committing themselves to achieving carbon neutrality.
Of the Terra Carta, and with your valuable support and encouragement, Monsieur le Président, one practical initiative has been to create a global private sector alliance to develop natural capital as an investment theme and actively to increase capital allocation in this direction, targeting $10 billion by 2022. This alliance will also aim to expand the flow of natural capital investment through corporate offsetting and carbon pricing prospects. Mesdames et Messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen, a sustainable future is the way for us to ensure growth in our era, but it's up to us to seize the opportunity this offers. I sincerely hope that the Terra Carta will help us to achieve this. Furthermore, as we turn towards a brighter, more sustainable future, as we honor our commitments, let's join our efforts, lest we lose any more time. The time is now. It's up to us. It's up to us to make sure that every day counts. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, His Royal Highness, and thank you for your French and your commitment. Now, merci infiniment.
Thank you so much for your commitment. And I think the Private Investors Alliance, focused on nature, is a very powerful movement, especially in light of all of the work that's already gone into this. As you said, $10 billion by 2022. That's practically tomorrow. So I wish to thank all of those who've joined you, HSBC, Miraval, other companies who've managed us to mobilize and to do so at scale. We are most grateful for those efforts. Keep up the pace. We're now going to move to the first of today's sessions, protecting land and maritime species. I'd like to hand over right away to Christian Samper, the Director General of the Wildlife Conservation Society.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Humans have been living on this planet for a little more than 200,000 years, and we share a planet with another 10 million species. But the fact is that no other single species has had more impact on the planet than we have. As a matter of fact, science shows us that only 23% of the terrestrial surface of the planet remains wild today. These rapid changes threaten not only life on Earth, but also our own existence as a species. The 2019 report of IPBES confirmed that more than 1 million species are in danger of extinction. One of the most important and proven solutions to tackle this global crisis is the use of protected areas. It's a practice that's been used by local indigenous communities for centuries, and governments have stepped up the pace of work in this area. We have strong evidence that effectively designed and managed protected areas are key to the conservation and sustainable diversity, help with climate mitigation, and sustain local livelihoods. The United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity adopted the Aichi targets in 2010, and Target 11 focuses on protected areas and set a goal of protecting 17% of land and 10% of the ocean. 10 years later, if we look at it, we have now protected 15% of the land and freshwater, and a little bit more than 7.5% of the ocean today. The good news is that we have made major progress declaring protected and other conserved areas, and we have more than doubled them in the last decade. However, they are not all well managed. They do not represent the diversity of ecosystems, and many of them are too small to be viable in the long term, especially in view of climate change. We have the science, we have the practice and the experience, and we know what it takes to make them work. What we need is higher ambition, political commitment, and financial resources to implement actions in 3 crucial areas. First, science tells us that we must expand protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures to cover at least 30% of the land and sea by 2030. We must identify and protect the ecosystems with the highest integrity, especially intact forests and coral reefs that are home to the largest number of species. Second, we must make sure that protected and other conserved areas represent the diversity of ecosystems and species, and that they are effective for the long term. Science shows us that only 42% of the ecoregions of the planet are well represented in protected areas, and that 78% of all the threatened species don't have adequate protection at this time. This is especially critical given the impacts that climate change is having on the distribution and migration of many species. And third, we must make sure that these areas are managed effectively. This requires that we ensure that we have the adequate resources, people, financing, and the capacity to manage them in the long term. I am encouraged by recent initiatives like the Blue Action Fund and the Legacy Landscapes Program that are mobilizing resources to help countries around the world with this program. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the world is facing 3 major crises today: the loss of biodiversity, climate change, and the pandemic. They are all interrelated with many of the same causes and solutions. Protected and conserved areas are at the heart of the solution, and they are also critical to achieving the UN Sustainable Goals. These are the nature strongholds, and they are key to the future and the survival of life on Earth. We have a shared vision, and we have the need to adopt a global goal, which is to halt and reverse the biodiversity loss by 2030, and protected and conserved areas must be at the heart of this. We at the Wildlife Conservation Society stand ready to work with all of you to build a sustainable future that is nature positive and carbon neutral for the benefits of people and planet. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Christian.
Thank you so much, Christian. The scientific elements have been established. You've reminded us of this, and the goal we need to set ourselves for 2030, the subject of representativeness and real protection of all species, as well as the management of these zones. That is the goal on the 2 points you brought up. First of all, on the coalition, great ambition for nature and people, and then an exemplary Mediterranean for 2030. Firstly, a highly ambitious coalition for nature and people. Our goal is to broaden this coalition. We've already done that for today, and we'll come back to that. And then to continue this effort up until Kunming, so as to have as many countries as possible on board and to meet the goals that you just mentioned. And now a short video on our ambition for nature and people.
Our relationship with the natural world is out of balance. We are burning the library of life.
1 million species could go extinct in the next decades if we do not act. But this isn't just about species.
The ecosystems we rely on for our water, our air, and our food are also at risk of collapse.
Our survival depends on nature's survival. And scientists say we must act boldly and urgently.
That is why the United Arab Emirates,
Nigeria, the United Kingdom,
Costa Rica,
France has joined forces with many countries across the world to form the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People.
Together, we're championing a global deal to safeguard our planet and ourselves. We are committed to conserving at least 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030.
This ambitious but achievable global goal can help us address the most important interdependence crisis: biodiversity collapse, the climate crisis, and the emergence of pandemics.
And this goal will also strengthen our economies and livelihoods through creating jobs.
It is time to take bold action to face this planetary emergency.
To heed the wisdom of our indigenous peoples and local communities as protectors of the most biodiverse sites in the world.
De proteger os nossos sistemas de suporte de vida e de nos tornarmos em ancestrais responsáveis para as futuras gerações.
But we cannot achieve this alone.
We call on all nations to join us in the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, to commit to protecting at least 30% of our land and ocean by 2030.
And to advocate for this goal before the world meets to agree on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework under the Convention of Biological Diversity.
Let's heal our relationship with the Earth.
Let's act now.
Je vais tout de suite passer la parole.
Let me give the floor straight away to the president of Costa Rica. You've seen him briefly in that film, Carlos Alvarado Quesada, who is holding high the coalition that you've just seen. And I really want to welcome his personal commitment and also the commitment of his whole country to this work. You have the floor, Carlos.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. President Macron, for organizing this summit, which is so important for the world, for humanity, and for your leadership in terms of biodiversity and subjects related to the climate. I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity also to welcome everyone who is part of this event. I have the honor to present the launch of the coalition of high ambition for nature and for persons. And our countries will commit themselves to environmental action, and we're united around the goal of protecting at least 30% of the surface of the earth and the seas of this planet by 2030. Nature, our oceans, the earth, provide resources which are indispensable services for life itself: drinking water, pure air, acting against the effects of climate change, pest control, pollination, maintaining the genetic diversity of this planet. These are only some of the services and the things which nature provides to life on this planet. And we have solutions based on nature as well. However, today, only 7% of oceans are protected, and only 15% of Earth territory is protected, a point in time when we have an accelerated loss of our ecosystems and of biomass around the whole planet. Today, our responsibility as leaders is not only for our citizens and our generation. Our responsibility as leaders resides with those who are going to be born. Our responsibility at this precise point in time, which is unique in history, resides with the whole history of humanity and with the future of humanity. Probably this is the only generation in all history that has had these responsibilities laid upon us. We, those of us who are meeting here, and many others as well. And for this reason, today, in 2021, it is time to act and to commit ourselves to this coalition for nature and for people, so as to meet these goals and challenges of conservation and protection of 30% of the territory of the Earth, including oceans, for 2030. This is a challenge that we will put to the world in the pre-COP in Costa Rica in 2019. This also has benefits, economic benefits, as we saw in Costa Rica's case, based on a model of ecotourism, which is one of the main industries of our country. It's a clean industry. Or scientific research, where in such a small country as Costa Rica, we host 5% of all the biodiversity of the world. This is what we're talking about. The idea that conservation of the heritage of our original people, our indigenous people, who gave us knowledge from time immemorial to show us how to live in harmony with the earth, being just one more element on its surface. Costa Rica, for us, it's a true honor to be able to participate in this group. I would call upon the distinguished leaders present here and elsewhere not to be afraid, to be brave, to do the right thing, and to follow this challenge where it leads us. Because at this unique point in time in humanity's history, that is what we are being called upon to do. This is what we must call upon ourselves to do. In the midst of this pandemic, of this biodiversity crisis, of climate change, today is the time to act with bravery. Let us be ambitious, let us be positive, and let us move forward with our goals for this year to protect our planet and our humanity. Many thanks to all participants. Many thanks, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, President. Thank you, dear Carlos. Many thanks for this commitment. And I shall now give the floor to the President of the Council of Ministers in Italy, Giuseppe Conte. Dear Giuseppe.
Hello. Dear Emmanuel, thank you very much for this invitation for organizing this stimulating summit on the biodiversity. Dear distinguished colleagues and guests, 2021 is a crucial year for the planet. The COPs of the three major Rio Conventions on climate, biodiversity, and desertification will take place in the coming months, as will the fifth session of the UN Environment Assembly and the UN Conference on the Oceans. We have therefore the chance to make concrete steps in redressing the damages inflicted to the Earth, bending the curve of climate change in restoring ecosystems. The pandemic has reminded us that destroying habitats increases the risk of spreading diseases from wildlife to people. Its impact, coupled with biodiversity loss and climate change, was hardest on the most vulnerable, compromising sustainable development and the 2030 agenda. We all depend on one fragile common home. These principles should not only accompany but also give a strong input to the regeneration of our social and economic systems after the pandemic. This is why Planet is one of the three pillars, together with people and prosperity, of Italy's G20 presidency. Rebuilding our relationship with nature requires a new holistic approach, an approach that the Italian presidency will pursue, for instance, by fostering land degradation neutrality and tackling marine litter. Challenges and solutions of environmental issues are all connected. Climate change impacts biodiversity loss, which in turn causes desertification, soil, and ocean degradation. In the same way, the restoration of ecosystems on land and sea, the recovery of biodiversity and reforestation are key elements for tackling climate change. Inspired by these principles, we will work for a successful COP26 in partnership with the UK. Italy is committed to enhance the ambition of the Global Biodiversity Framework in view of COP15 on biological diversity. We supported the new EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 and its targets of expanding land and marine protected areas to 30% by 2030. As presidency of the G20, we propose to the membership to set that target also at a global level on the occasion of COP15. We endorse the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, and we joined the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. Furthermore, we work with UNESCO to promote a global network of environmental experts to provide free assistance and capacity building for the management of UNESCO-recognized natural areas across the globe. Through this crucial year, we should and will step up our efforts. We owe it to ourselves and especially to the younger generations. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher Giuseppe.
Thank you very much to Giuseppe. Thank you for the commitment of Italy during its presidency of the G20 on all the subjects that you remembered, that you reminded us of. And we have a concrete action and the commitment of France to protect 30% of the terrestrial and marine surface of our planet by 2022. And this is also the occasion to launch the initiative for the Mediterranean in view of the World Congress on Nature in Marseille next summer. So I'm going to give the floor now to Barbara Pompili, who will present the challenges and objectives of this coalition on the Mediterranean and will be the moderator for this section. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Out of all the ecosystems, the Mediterranean Sea is very important because it represents 1% of the total ocean area, but at the same time it is extremely rich when it comes to biodiversity, 17 different species, and this wealth of species is endangered because of human activity, artificial exploitation of coastal areas, amongst others. And because of these threats, we want to launch a coalition to remobilize different heads of state and government and actors to make the Mediterranean Sea an exemplary sea in 2030. Now, there's an action plan that goes with this, protection of marine biodiversity, the development of sustainable fisheries, combating pollution, and sustainable maritime transportation. The purpose is to protect 30% of the marine. This is a project supported by France, Costa Rica, and other countries as well. And I would like to turn to Prince Albert here. I would like to ask him how this plan for the Mediterranean is going to be rolled out. You have the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for having taken the initiative to organize this event in a particularly different context. Our common responsibility doesn't end here and now. Of course, it is all about the world that we're going to leave to our children, especially these large seas and oceans that depend on us just as much as we depend on them. And we have to make a commitment towards these seas, just like we're doing for forestries, to make sure that they survive. And we would like to therefore protect our beautiful Mediterranean Sea, which is also very fragile. And we have supported numerous initiatives, one of which seems to be very promising, particularly when we think about how best to act to protect our planet. It's about the marine protected areas, which is very important to protect the most fragile ecosystems and to promote their development. In 2015, France and Tunisia created a trust, the BED Fund, which has now garnered the support of other countries around the Mediterranean. With the Barcelona Convention, it has a very flexible structure with regional cooperation. And the aim is to provide sustainable financing to these protected areas, improve their efficacy and make them more long-lasting. The aim is to have a responsible investment strategy. 8 such areas are protected, and the Med Fund enables deploying teams in the field over a period of 3,000 square kilometers. In 2025, 30 million euros will be spent to protect around 20 marine protected areas. And we're going to move towards protecting even more such areas. And Mr. Kisato referred to this as well. So there is the World Environment Fund, there is the French Environmental Fund, and there are several different funds and aquariums that will be partners in this project. And I hope that other countries and organizations will also come on board. These marine protected areas are extremely important to protect biodiversity and also very important to develop ecotourism and responsible tourism. And researchers believe that they play an important role in climate change mitigation. Now, before, I don't really want to say too much, but I just want to talk about the Plastic Coalition nonetheless. Plastics contaminate all ecosystems, including our food. And in order to face this scourge, my foundation announced 4 years ago an initiative beyond Plastic Med, which is called BMed, with the IUCN and other foundations. We have pledged 1.3 million euros for 57 countries and 15 countries of the Mediterranean region. Projects in the field aimed at reducing the use of plastic, using alternatives to plastic, and also improving the collection systems, creating awareness, and also helping define new regulations are certain initiatives that have been taken and that have offered a lot of positive opportunities. We have to prove, and we have shown that we are not powerless in the face of this situation. There are other challenges as well, such as climate change, where we can also work together with each achievement to achieve tangible and quick results. It is our duty to do so, and it is in our power to do so. And this is why we are here side by side with you, Mr. President and Madam Minister. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Indeed, climate change has a significant impact on the Mediterranean, and the increase in the temperature of the seas is rising constantly. It's the maritime industry that is partly responsible for this. It is the seventh largest producer of greenhouse gases. Then there's also tourism. The Mediterranean is a very coveted destination for tourism. Well, let me now turn to Mr. Gilles Simeoni. Could you please tell us how the action plan on biodiversity can actually work to combat the trend of degradation of biodiversity? Mr. President, respected heads of state and government, ministers, thank you very much for giving me the occasion to participate in this One Planet Summit. I would like to wish you peace and good health in the new year. I think these are part of the cardinal virtues. Today I'm not talking as the President of the Executive Council of Corsica, but the President of the Commission of the CRPM Islands that bring together the Mediterranean island communities. 11 states, bringing together about 15 million EU citizens, so European citizens. So thank you very much, Mr. President, for asking us to join this summit. And there's a threefold message here. The first is to say that there are indeed actors that are indeed the most important actors in this region, but they're not the only one. And therefore, even though the heads of state and government have their role to play, but we also need to include other organizations, youth organizations, civil society organizations, or research organizations, universities, etc., because we need to rethink our relationship with nature. If the planet is our common good, and if the Mediterranean is also our common good, well, that is the case with water as well, and the same holds for health, vaccine, education. So that is the first message that I would like to convey. Combating the deterioration of biodiversity is not just something that states need to do, but also citizens, and mainly citizens of the Mediterranean region. The second message is that the Mediterranean is represented as all sorts of risks and divides, but the Mediterranean region is also a melting pot of different cultural identities, and we firmly believe that based on this melting pot, from this melting pot, we will have initiatives that make sense for a Mediterranean-wide project that will apply both to the north and the south, and will mobilize all the energies of the different players. The third message through the Conference of the Islands, these Mediterranean islands are part and parcel of the Mediterranean region. They are perceived as a constraint, sometimes even as a burden seen from the mainland, but the islands are factors of innovation, and we believe that in the Mediterranean region, islands such as Corsica, Sardinia, the Balearic Islands, Sicily, etc., work together, work with their member states and cooperate together between the North and the South. Now, to answer your question about transportation, particularly maritime transport, this is a key issue indeed, especially for the islands, because the COVID-19 crisis has demonstrated that we need quality transport, maritime transport, for our economic and social relations. Now, for the action plan of the Mediterranean, this plan is based on efficiency. Each of the different pillars of action, each of these actions are of interest to us because they have an impact on us directly in the Mediterranean region. Article 14, green ports, for instance, in the north and in the south. We're working on that. We are trying to electrify the ports, provide alternative sources of energy. Article 15, the MARPOL Convention to prevent air pollution. This is an ambitious target to control emissions as far as sulfur dioxide is concerned. And once again, the different states in the north and the south have to work together on these targets. There's also the Corsica Assembly and also work that is being conducted within the Islands Commission itself. So there is a lot of work being done currently and will be pursued in the future. For example, research and development on different modes of transport. There is a lot of work has been done on scrubbers, for instance, how to reduce SO2 emissions from ships, how to use new technologies, liquid gas, hydrogen as well. We hope that hydrogen will have an increasing role in the future. Then there is also the degassing activity, pollution due to oil and hydrocarbons, etc. So all these issues are the different actions that we are focusing on. We are focusing on the releasing of toxic products as well. So the objectives have been clearly identified. We have a shared ambition that has been reiterated at the highest levels through the One Planet Summit in particular, and I would like to thank His Royal Highness, thank Monaco, Italy, and to a more modest extent Corsica on the archipelago, the Pelagos Sanctuary, the protection of different species on land as well as in the sea. There are a lot of expectations and there are a lot of challenges as well. And as an elected representative myself, and mainly as a citizen, I would like to say that the different pledges and commitments that have been made today in front of the whole world under the initiative of Emmanuel Macron, I do hope that we will now walk the talk, that these commitments will take concrete shape in the months to come, and they will be accompanied by specific policies, innovative strategies, and a departure from the models that have been used so far. If we can do this together, we will manage to succeed for the generations, for current generations and for future generations. It will be definitely worth the while. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Simoni. As you can see, what we're looking at is a very concrete action plan to act on biodiversity and to stop polluting this sea, which is home to a host of different natural resources. It is the beginning of a process, so we have to continue to mobilize our efforts to make sure that this coalition is as broad a coalition as possible and to bring as many other countries possible on board. Thank you.
I know that Prime Minister Sanchez is indisposed. We have the Vice President of the Government of Spain. I can see her on the screen, Anne Teresa. Yes, of course, you have the floor, Anne Teresa.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Madam Minister, distinguished colleagues. It is a distinct pleasure for me to be here today. I was tasked to take part in this event on behalf of the Prime Minister. He wishes to apologize for his absence this afternoon.
This is the foundation of our common roots, and I think that it is sustainability as such, so development, social, economic, and environmental challenges ahead of us. And unsustainable patterns of production and consumption are jeopardizing the survival of the Mediterranean ecosystem. The human use of natural environments, the temperature increase, and the unbearable levels of plastics and chemical pollution have led to biodiversity loss rates never seen before. So we need to combat this. And we need to conserve nature, but conservation efforts are no longer enough. We need to reverse the loss of nature. And to do so, we need to produce and consume in a different way and to work together with so many sectors, so to work with the productive sectors, the forestry, the fishing, the infrastructures, the energy, the transportation, the tourism, as you say, or the sustainable finance. And we feel co-custodians of the Mediterranean Sea, as well as proud partners of this high ambition alliance. Thanks so much for these initiatives. We think that we need to invest in a fantastic action plan for an exemplary Mediterranean Sea by 2030, fighting illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. This is very important. We truly believe that this is possible, and we think that the Global Ocean Alliance, the Decade of Oceans, demand us to work so to invest in different figures to engage to a minimum of 30% of the global ocean to be protected through marine protected areas by 2030. Just a final comment. I think that the loss of nature in the sea also comes from inland. So we need also to invest in the coastal areas with nature-based solutions, but we also need to invest in the way, as I said, we produce and we tackle with our own waste inland to avoid this waste being part of that polluted seas we want to see anymore. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Teresa. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll see you in Marseille to take our work forward on the Mediterranean Initiative. But more broadly, I just wanted to highlight the importance of this cooperation between the public and the private sector, local authorities, civil society. This is key for the success of our work, and also the goals we've set for protecting terrestrial and maritime species. France hopes to protect 30% of terrestrial and marine areas by 2030. And of course, we will be buttressing our efforts over the 3 coming years, mobilizing many young people also through the civilian service, which we are setting up. We will, of course, be allocating additional resources to that end. This brings me to the second session we have planned for this afternoon, promoting agroecology.
Bien.
Very well. When it comes to agroecology, as you know, it's about overhauling our production models, protecting biodiversity, ensuring we achieve food security, and achieving economic development, thereby creating jobs in many corners of our planet. This mobilization for agroecology is part and parcel of our collective ambition to achieve the development of the African continent. I'll be delving into the details a little bit later about what we're doing in France, in Europe, and the efforts we're going to be promoting throughout the world. We should not juxtapose biodiversity and agricultural systems. Agroecology and sustainable agriculture, such as the kind promoted by France and its European partners, presents an innovative approach, allowing us to boost yields, ensure new beneficial externalities, such as the preservation of biodiversity, carbon storage, greenhouse gas emissions, conservation of water resources, and investment opportunities for many SMEs. To start things off, I would like to hand over to Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission. Thank you very much, Ursula, for being with us here today. You're going to tell us about the European strategy for protecting biodiversity, promoting agroecology.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, cher Emmanuel, dear friends. I'm delighted to be with you. And it is fitting that we start this new year with a One Planet Summit in Paris, talking about biodiversity, because I believe 2021 will be the year when the world turns over a new leaf for our planet. In a few months, the world will come together in Kunming. And this COP15 for nature must be like the COP21 was for climate. And we need a Paris-style agreement to go with it.
On n'entend pas l'intervention de Madame la Présidente.
Global and game-changing. The stakes could not be higher, and the imperative act could not be more compelling. This is about sustainable development, because thriving biodiversity can ensure access to food, water, and energy for billions of people. This is about equality, because we know that the effects of nature loss disproportionately affect poorer and indigenous communities. This is about our security, because conflicts explode when more people grapple for less natural resources. And this is about our quality of life, because we need nature in our lives for our physical and mental health. We all know the scale and the urgency of the task ahead of us this year, and we see the changes in our everyday lives, from more concrete blocks to less wilderness and wildlife, to increasing temperatures and extreme weather. And these worrying changes are different sides of the same coin. In fact, they mutually reinforce each other. When we lose forests, we don't just lose green space or natural habitat. We lose a key ally in our fight against climate change. When temperatures rise and nature disappears, we suffer more natural disasters and zoonotic diseases. And we have spoken a lot about these links between biodiversity loss and COVID. But this is not the first, last, or even most telling example. Think of how one of the deadliest outbreaks of Ebola is thought to have started, with a young boy playing next to a tree in a remote village in Guinea, a tree that had been infested by bats who had been pushed towards the village because 80% of forests in the region had been destroyed. And we know the tragic repercussions this had. And if we don't urgently act to protect our nature, we may already be at the beginning of an era of pandemics. But we can do something about it. It needs concerted global action and local sustainable development. And just as we cooperate for our one planet, we need together for our one health. And this is why we will prioritize research on One Health across Horizon Europe. And let me be clear, we will invest several hundred million euros over the next 4 years for research on biodiversity, animal health, emerging diseases, and much more. It is why we will work closely with our international partners on research in the spirit of the PRESOD initiative launched by France and member states, which the European Commission welcomes. And it is also why we will bolster and sponsor initiatives like the African-led Great Green Wall. I would like to congratulate the African Union and all of the partners involved for bringing a decades-old dream to life. We have already seen the difference it can make, stretching from Senegal in the west to Djibouti in the east. It has helped restore 15 million hectares of degraded land in Ethiopia and supported farmers in Niger to produce enough grain to feed an extra 2.5 million people a year. And this is why I say today, we will mobilize even more than the 700 million euros per year already raised for the Great Green Wall project. The more partners and the more member states join and invest, the more we can do. And this is the spirit of Team Europe, and I am determined that we can do so much more working with our African partners. This shows that turning over a new leaf for nature all comes down to local action and global ambition. And this is why the European Green Deal, we are stepping up our own action and ambition, both locally and globally. Our new biodiversity and farm-to-fork strategies will lead the way. They set out the EU's ambitions to protect indeed 30% of land and sea areas in Europe and around the world. They will help us restore damaged rivers and plant 3 billion trees by 2030. They will bring help and bring back to pollinators to agricultural lands and reduce the use and risk of harmful pesticides. And the new, greener common agricultural policy will help us protect livelihoods and food security while we protect our nature and our climate. But we know we need to do more. Being a major economy and a trading superpower comes with responsibilities. And it is our duty to ensure that our single market does not drive deforestation in local communities and other parts of the world. And this is why later this year, we will propose new legislation to minimize the risk of products linked to global deforestation being placed on the European market. So Europe is ready to lead the way, and I hope others will join us in that effort. Dear friends, this sums up the EU's approach in this historic year for nature. We will lead by ambition and action at home, and we will do everything we can to bring as many partners on board with us. This is why we will work to broker an ambitious agreement in Kunming, and it is why we will support initiatives like the Great Green Wall. Let's make sure that we turn over this new leaf together. Thanks very much to all the participants, and thanks very much to you, Mr. President, cher Emmanuel.
Merci beaucoup, Ursula.
Thank you very much, Ursula. Thank you for your commitments. And we've also taken good note of the support and the commitment of the European Commission on this front. You put it very well when you said that the challenge we must confront in order to reconcile food security and agroecology, all of this has a strong European-African dimension. Thus, it's great that we have a coalition around this topic with a view to accelerating our efforts. And in fact, a great deal of work went on this morning when we discussed the Great Green Wall. I'd now like to hand over to the President of IFAD, Gilbert N'Bo, former Prime Minister of Togo. IFAD, as we know, has played a key role in the Great Green Wall. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your mobilization. You can count on France's support.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Heads of state and government, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, to directly continue with the discussion we've already begun. Obviously, I don't need to remind you all of the need to be as concise as possible in your remarks, and I shall try to set a good example by limiting myself to 1.5 minutes in my opening remarks. Just to introduce the panelists you'll be seeing, we'll be hearing from His Excellency, the President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. But before that, we'll be hearing from the President of the World Bank Group, David Malpass, and of course, Mr. Karim Aital, Director General of Géocoton, and Ms. Mariam Sow, who is co-founder of 3AO, the Agro-Environmental Alliance in West Africa. Ms. Sow, if we were to start with you, would you be kind enough to share with us your experience on the ground in terms of promoting agroecology, particularly with rural populations? You have the floor, madam. Thank you all very much. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you, Mr. President. It's a pleasure to be able to speak of Senegal's experience in agro-environmental matters and of 3AO. In Senegal, all the major players, in their full diversity, are now in a national dynamic for agro-environmental change. Our idea is to mobilize our resources, our knowledge, and face the challenges of our time. Degradation of our ecosystems, loss of biodiversity, climate change, and our productive systems. Our dynamic brings together local rural populations, NGOs, research partners, nationally and internationally, those based in Senegal in the last case. We are also a former founder member of the 3AO Alliance, which exists to plead in favor of agro-environmental matters in our sub-region. Our dynamic then in Senegal has put forward a document of conclusions that we have transmitted to the President of Senegal, who has said he will make it a central part of his 5-year term. At the request of our Minister of Agriculture, we have begun negotiations with his ministry so as to provide a framework for multi-actor dialogue for the implementation of our recommendations. This will, of course, include different ministries which have to do with agroecological matters. There's also the need today for a paradigm change and to accelerate our agro-environmental transition. We invite all of our collective and financial partners on negotiations of financial systems which are properly adapted for a sustainable agro-environment which is supported by the people and for the people, and which will allow us to reduce inequalities on different levels. Aspiring to food sovereignty, nutritional and health safety, and of course economic autonomy in the Senegal and in our sub-region. In this way, we can make present and future communities more secure. Mr. President, I would ask, dear participants, for you to consider that Senegal will confirm its leadership in agro-environmental matters with structural projects that will allow us to move towards local dynamics. But there also needs to be good governance of our resources and egalitarian exchanges at all levels. We can no longer deal with this problem all alone. We need the understanding and participation of everyone so that we can bring a response to this urgent matter. which is not just urgent for Senegal and for Africa, but for the whole world. I thank you, Mr. President, and I hope that we will have a longer time to have an exchange about Senegal of the future. No, it is I who thanks you, Ms. Sow, for this very concrete contribution on the activities that you are carrying out in the field, and I congratulate these.
Malpass. First of all, thank you so much for being there, given the early time in Washington. We know that the World Bank is an important player when it comes to supporting countries with landscape restoration or biodiversity protection. And listening to you earlier and during your opening statement, you made it very clear that you intend to increase your investment in the coming years. So could you please maybe share with us more about those plans, please? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me check the mic this time. Am I all right?
Very well.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you. President Hongbo and Your Excellencies all, I'm very pleased to announce that between now and 2025, the World Bank Group will invest more than $5 billion to improve livelihoods and restore degradation in the Sahel, Lake Chad, and Horn of Africa regions. This investment comes at a crucial time. It will help improve livelihoods as countries recover from COVID-19, while also dealing with the impact of both biodiversity loss and climate change on people and economies. It includes interventions in agriculture, water, community development, food security, resilient infrastructure, landscape restoration, and renewable energy. Working closely with many partners, Pro-Green, that's our global fund dedicated to boosting countries' efforts to address landscape degradation. Pro-Green will focus $14.5 million on projects in Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. The Sahel region in particular is one of the most vulnerable to desertification and land degradation. Temperature increases are projected to be 1.5 times faster than the global average. 80% of farmlands are degraded, and about 30 million people are food insecure, according to FAO. COVID-19 is exacerbating poverty levels. Extreme poverty rates in the Sahel are expected to increase for the first time in decades by 1.5 percentage points on average in 2020. And this translates into more than 1 million additional extreme poor in the Sahel region. So investing in restoring the Sahel's landscapes is crucial to help mitigate these trends. The World Bank's SAWAP program, which began in 2012, has helped countries in the region to increase soil productivity and improve food security. That brings greater stability to people's lives. In countries from Senegal to Djibouti, the program reached more than 19 million people and placed more than 1.6 million hectares of land under sustainable land management. For example, in Ethiopia, our project restored land and addressed the root causes of land degradation, including tenure insecurity. Land certificates have been issued to more than 360,000 households, many headed by women and youth. And investing in landscape restoration makes economic sense. For example, in Niger, for every dollar invested, there's a return of $6. Finally, we're committed to partnering with all of you to transform this region. Only together can we break the vicious cycle of poverty and create a more equal and sustainable world. Thank you very much, President Hongbo.
Thank you so much, President Malpass. Just allow me to really quote you, investing and restoring, investing and restoring. Thank you so much, and thank you for your commitment that you made it very clear. Mesdames et Messieurs.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to turn to Géo Coton. Mr. Aitalbe will be able to share with us not simply his experience, but also how he sees the involvement of the private sector. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. President of the French Republic, Your Royal Highness, Mr. President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm very honored to be here today and to take this opportunity to put cotton growing in the Sahel in its right place on the chessboard of economics, of preservation, biodiversity, of peacekeeping, and of adaptation to climate change. In this region, cotton is produced by 2.5 million farmers on 3.4 hectares without irrigation. 30 million people live on this crop in a relationship of confidence with public and private agro-industrial players, who I would like to welcome here, naming many of them. With 1.2 billion euros injected into this every year and 2.4 billion in currency, this is the very backbone of the rural Sahel economies. This is the picture of Africa, resilient and generous, with fiber, with biomass, with food applications as well as textile ones. This dynamizes local economies, distributes money in the countryside, and in fact, everything is good in cotton. Tout est bon dans le coton. At the time people are dying of COVID, it's also very important for Africans not to die of lack of activity. Facing climate change, cotton culture in the Sahara is going to be ever more respectful of natural resources, using organic materials. You have to have bio inputs, semi-direct coverage, and so on and so on. With the contribution of CIRAD, the model is developing so as to amplify production systems in agro-environmental matters. We have another challenge before us today, which is the impact of armed conflict in the Sahel. In Burkina Faso, where Agent Cotton is working with 65,000 family farms in the west of the country, the cotton growing area is strongly impacted by this crisis. And in spite of this, the group is pursuing its commitment and locally investing in a fourth unit with 15 million euros funding this with local banks' involvement. The example of cotton is a remarkable one, but many other agricultural areas in Africa are also undervalued and have similar strong points. So here, public-private investment blended, as we've seen this morning with the forum, and the support of the financial community internationally to our local firms will contribute to winning the challenge of the agro-environmental transition. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much for your remarks. And once again, thank you. I'd like now to give the floor, with all my respects, to His Excellency, the President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. You have the floor, Mr. President. Thank you, Gilbert. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, dear Emmanuel, for once again allowing me to be here to take part in this One Planet Summit. I welcome the honorable guests who have allowed us, especially those who have already taken the floor, to listen to their very rich contributions. As I already emphasized this morning, desertification and land degradation and degradation of ecosystems is inexorably increasing in Africa, and more particularly in the Sahel, where these phenomena constitute one of the major causes of anarchic urbanization and of poverty. This situation reduces land productivity, availability of water and energy resources, medicinal plants, and the possibility of carbon storage in soil. It needs, therefore, to be apprehended in the context of an integrated approach which brings together restoration and sustainable management of land-based ecosystems, productive activities such as agriculture, livestock raising, and forestry. In that context, agro-environment represents a major project for our countries in the Sahel and the Saharan region. And it's precisely so as to implement integrated solutions that correspond to the ecological and socioeconomic stakes that we are playing for, that we have launched a new basis for sustainable development, creating an initiative such as the Great Green Wall. This approach, which is multidimensional, has already shown good results where it has been implemented. It therefore constitutes an excellent opportunity to have a post-COVID relaunching of our economies. This pickup in the economy, over and above the consequences it will have for populations that have been greatly impacted by the health and economic crises, will also allow us to accelerate progress toward meeting sustainable development goals and those of the Paris Agreement on climate, and will contribute to upholding the health of our ecosystems and prevention of zoonotic diseases, such as COVID-19. The Great Green Wall offers us the proper framework for making significant change in our modes of production and substantially improving the conditions of life of our populations in the Sahel, which are the ones who are the most severely impacted by the multiform crises that beset us today. Convinced by all of this, Mauritania has placed the Great Green Wall as among one's priorities for economic recovery after COVID-19. These are measures we adopted last September and gives a preponderant role to the relevant sectors. The goal of this program in the context of COVID-19 is to create conditions for economic recovery that will be sustainable and will create employment, just as it will contribute to the progressive transformation of our modes of production to make them more sustainable. This transformation will involve diversification and the adaptation of agricultural production to climate fluctuations. Over and above this program, over and above this program will allow us in the medium term to improve the availability or affordability of energy and encourage local transformation of and processing of production by creating a value chain which will create revenue streams and employment locally, especially for women and young people. Initiatives like the Great Green Wall need, given the economic and health crises and their impact on the indebtedness of our countries, more than ever, solidarity of one and all, so as to meet the goals of the United Nations Decade for the Restoration of Ecosystems, 2021-2030. Finally, I should like to emphasize the need to promote tools that will allow us to change our modes of production and to disseminate practices of sustainable agriculture with access to necessary technology and funding to improve technical and scientific skills. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Président.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you very much for your presence here for this very important event in Paris, and it speaks volumes for your commitment to this theme. It is a very difficult situation. For health reasons and for other reasons. And this is indeed why we need to redouble our efforts and focus even more on this theme than in the past. One Planet Summit is indeed an acceleration of the Great Green Wall, with the first target being 18%, and we are preparing for the Africa of 2030. We've heard that forests preceded civilizations and deserts followed civilizations, and this is exactly what we are looking at right now. And I would like to say that we have a huge challenge before us. 100 million hectares restored, to 250 million tons of carbon sequestered, etc., etc. And this is how Africa can show that it is indeed a player in the fight against global warming. 5 pillars were mentioned today, which show that, first of all, we have gone beyond the 10 billion that were initially planned. And these 5 pillars will help to create synergies between these different actions, promote SMEs, local value chains, local ecosystems, support I Am Africa, which is a very important charter that was presented this morning. And there's a pillar of restoration of land and ecosystems. That means that we need to go and reverse the trends. Then we also need to restore land and move to sustainable management of ecosystems. And then there's also a problem related to access to energy. Access to energy is indeed a huge hurdle. The fourth pillar, rather, is to have an institutional economic framework which is conducive to effective governance. And the fifth pillar is capacity building. And all this has to be underpinned by transparency, accountability. And there's the Montpellier Summit in July, the UN General Assembly in September, and France will take over the presidency of the European Union, where all these issues will once again be addressed. So thank you, Mr. President, for your support and for providing us with the impetus to pursue this project of the Green Wall. We would like to continue to develop part of this great Green Wall. We in France are also very committed to the project. We have our minister and deputy minister present here today precisely for this purpose. Now we will move to the next session. You have 14.3 billion up on the screen. Thank you very much to all the donors. And let's move on to session 3, which is going to be devoted to mobilizing finance for biodiversity.
Bien, sur ce sujet, nous avons...
Now, on this topic, we have learned how important mobilizing of public and private funds is indeed very important to take up the challenge. We have seen this when it comes to climate, and we must remember that even as far as climate change is concerned, the fight is not over. And now we have to focus on mobilizing finance for biodiversity, which is a challenge to finance initiatives across the globe, but also to combat inequalities. Ecological transition is always underpinned by solidarity. The countries that bear the brunt of biodiversity depletion are already the poorest countries in the world. And if we can manage to show solidarity, just like we did on the climate side, solidarity towards emerging countries and medium-income countries, as well as to poor countries. And also, we should try to mobilize finance to help these poorest countries to take up the challenge. And we need to do this by rethinking our tools, by mobilizing public and private funds. I would like to thank the president of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, who is going to moderate this session. Thank you, Mr. President. And before I give the floor to three prime ministers from Canada, Norway, and Great Britain, as well as the chairman and general manager of Schneider Electric, Mr. Jean-Pascal Tricoire, I would just like to give you a few figures. $130,000 billion. This is what we are provided with through the ecosystem. It is the most under-evaluated common good. The second figure is what we lose every year, somewhere between 95 in 2011, $20,000 million are lost every year. These are the figures between 1995 and 2011. And then I just wanted to talk about figures and the link between biodiversity and climate in different ways. Now, when you look at the service provided by ecosystems, water, food, there's also pollination, which is carried out by bees. And bees are not very happy with all the chemicals that we shower on our fields. And so they're not very happy to continue pollination. Now, in order to quantify the value of this service, certain countries have tried to mechanize pollination. Of course, these are countries with a lot of labor, but despite everything, this exercise is very expensive. Another study was carried out by Ralph Lamy within the IMF on whales, and we realized that whales during their life are extraordinary traps for CO2 carbon sequestration. They are capable of sequestering huge amounts of carbon dioxide. And they also serve to nourish phytoplankton. Plankton is also very useful in CO2 sequestration. So you see that there is a very clear link between climate change, the need for carbon sequestration, and biodiversity. We have just about 1 million whales in the world. At the end of the 19th century, we had 3 million whales. Had we been capable of better protecting biodiversity, would have better protected whales, and whales in turn would have also favorably impacted the sequestration of CO2. I would like to give the floor to Justin first, Prime Minister of Canada. Justin, what are the initiatives that Canada has taken, in particular to protect the environment in developing countries, because Canada is a key player on this market? Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to see you. I would have loved to be with you in Paris physically, but unfortunately it's not for the moment possible. Thank you, Christine, for this question and for this incredible introduction by giving us figures about these different animals. It's always a pleasure to work with you, with Emmanuel, and with France in general to work to fight for our common priorities. Thank you for having organized this summit. I'm delighted to be with Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Solberg, and also Mr. Tricoire. Our survival depends on nature, but currently we are at a critical time. If we do not act, the ecosystems on which we depend for our air and for our food will collapse. So we have a collective responsibility to protect nature, and Canada is playing its role. Our government already invests $4 billion to plant 2 billion trees to support sustainable agriculture in our country. Canada is part of the High Ambition for Nature Coalition that aims to protect at least 30% of land and oceans in the world. Since 2015, we have increased the Canadian surface of our marine protected areas, moving from 1% to nearly 14% in barely 5 years. We're working hand in hand with Indigenous populations to protect a quarter of the land and waters of Canada in 2025 and 30% by 2030. And we want to make sure that biodiversity is taken on board in financial decisions. And for that, we are part of the working group on financial information relative to nature.
When sea levels rise, when droughts become the norm and not the exception, this has catastrophic effects on natural habitats. As an international community, we have a responsibility to act. Canada will contribute up to $55 million to the UN's Land Degradation Neutrality Fund to support sustainable land projects in low and middle income countries. And because we can't fight climate change without nature-based solutions, any future global climate finance contributions from Canada will include funds for biodiversity. Notre monde est interdit.
Our world is an interdependent one, and destroying natural habitat leads to necessarily bad but unexpected consequences, not just for the health of our planet, but also for those of our communities. That's why Canada will go on participating in international efforts in research to find the relationship between nature and the risks of worldwide pandemics. We need to work together so as to prevent future worldwide health crises by adapting measures to protect nature, fight against climate change, and encourage scientific knowledge. 2021 will be a year of determining importance in the collective importance that we are deploying to save our planet. Each of us has a role to play, and we must work together to act in such a way that the 15th COP on biodiversity will give concrete results and allow us to leave a better world to our children and our grandchildren. We are therefore extremely enthusiastic at the idea of working together with other countries so as to create a positive and carbon neutral, obviously, future. Thank you very much, my friends.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Justin.
We now turn to Prime Minister of Norway, dear Erna. You probably know and you've heard that France has decided to devote 30% of bilateral climate funding to biodiversity. Now, under your leadership, Norway has been a pioneer and an important player in international biodiversity and climate financing. Can you help us figure out how you link the climate finance and the biodiversity protection? Floor is yours.
First of all, thank you very much, Christine, and I would also like to thank President Macron for his important initiative in organizing this summit. The climate and biodiversity emergencies must be addressed jointly, also when mobilizing finance. The pandemic has hit us hard, and I think we all are dealing with its consequences, but we must also think ahead. Protecting biodiversity will strengthen global resilience against future threats, including new viruses and climate change. We need an ambitious global framework for biodiversity. And I believe 3 points should guide us. First, we should reduce or redirect subsidies that are harmful to biodiversity and start by screening such subsidies. Secondly, we must generate additional resources from both private and public sector. We need to initiate private-public partnerships on a far wider scale. And my third point is that we need to use our resources for conservation and sustainable use more effectively. Like France, Norway is increasing its ambitions. We have strengthened our national targets under the Paris Agreement. And over the last decade, we have increased biodiversity financing sustainably. We are looking to mobilize even more resources in the coming decade. Halting and reversing tropical deforestation is a key element in addressing both climate change and biodiversity loss. Together with Germany and the UK, we have fulfilled our joint pledge to provide more than $5 billion between 2015 and 2020. And Norway has pledged to continue its tropical forest initiative up to 2030. And ambitious forest countries such as Indonesia, Gabon, and Colombia are reducing their deforestation rates. Now, both private companies and countries must start paying for those results at scale. Eliminating deforestation in relation to agricultural commodities is a key issue. And I'm pleased that Norway has just signed the renewed Amsterdam Declaration Partnership Statement for 2025, together with 8 European countries, aiming to move this agenda forward in close cooperation with tropical forest countries. And let me end on a positive note. The pandemic has shown that the global community can mobilize vast resources when faced with an immediate crisis. We have the tools to respond to the biodiversity crisis, so let us show that we are ready to scale up action. And a good starting point is to make sure we include biodiversity when addressing climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership. I will now turn the floor over to Jean-Pascal Tricoire, who is the CEO of Schneider, which is a French-based company, I would suggest, but with an international footprint. Jean-Pascal, lovely to see you. Could you tell us how you take into account biodiversity and the footprint that a group like your group has on it when you decide your strategy, when you assess your business, when you decide on new investment? The floor is yours.
Yeah, Christine, thank you. Very glad to be with you. Monsieur le Président, merci d'organiser.
Thank you, Mr. President, for organizing this forum. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be part of this panel with you. I will try to tell you about the mobilization of industry for biodiversity, so as to answer the question Christine asked. I think that industry plays 2 roles. First of all, to show an example in terms of protecting biodiversity. That's the answer, I think, to the question that was just asked. And then the second thing we shouldn't forget is that industry also has a major role in finding solutions in protecting the biodiversity. Our first contribution is to try to show the way in preservation of biodiversity and the ecosystem. What you realize quite quickly when you work in industry is you can't do this alone. A very substantial percentage of our carbon footprint in biodiversity is linked to our partners, be they suppliers or integrators. So we help them to reduce their use of water and of carbon and the amount of pollution they produce. And very rapidly we realized that it was of imperative importance to work together to create the same momentum for biodiversity we did for climate. Schneider works in various different areas, but our specialty is the development of technologies to fight climate change. And when we make this commitment to fight climate change, we realize that diversity and climate change are the same cause, in fact, and you work on both subjects at the same time. So we have committed ourselves to the coalition very early on with the Global Compact, of course, which gives us a framework and a common vocabulary for reference. We're also working on Act for Nature International, in which a certain number of firms have made a commitment together to make some science-based contributions to managing and improving impact. And then there are yet other activities elsewhere in the world. To give you just 2 examples of things we all do together. The first is to measure, because I think in industry we say what gets measured gets done. And in order to measure the impact in biodiversity of our firm, we chose a series of measures and metrics shared with other companies to allow us to compare ourselves with one another and make progress together. We have a biodiversity score, which is a tier developed with other companies and institutions in the financial world. The second point is to get a commitment from business. In our case, it's quite simple. We have committed ourselves to have zero net loss of biodiversity in our own operations. This is a multifaceted commitment. We have 200 industrial sites, which should become waste resources in 2025, and we should have total circularity in water and resources and materials. Our own reduction of our carbon footprint, where we have guaranteed to be neutral by 2030, and also to help our clients using our technologies to save 100 million tons of carbon a year. All of this represents a movement which can only work if there's a team and it's coordinated. The last point, which seems to me to be important, is to have people who work with us at local level and the contribution of communities. A company like ours, which helps communities which didn't have energy to have green, carbon-free electricity, then we are participating in the preservation of the environment. My last point is on innovation. And we need to see here that the role of our companies, our businesses that have global resources in technology and finance, in project management, have an absolutely key role to play in finding innovative solutions that are groundbreaking in biodiversity. This is what we are doing, and what strikes me today is to see that many solutions already exist and that we simply need to adopt them, adapt them, integrate them, and continue to think about them, and design and rethink tomorrow's world, which isn't going to be like yesterday's or today's. We need to communicate also as much as we can, and to work together at better integrating these technologies in design of tomorrow's world. That's why I think that today's summit is very important indeed, because it will allow the different players of different origins to work together so as to create a more diverse and more sustainable world.
Jean-Pascal, and it is now my real pleasure to welcome the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, dear Boris. It's very, very nice to see you on screen, and we're delighted that you've accepted the invitation to the Planet Summit organized under the leadership of President Macron. I'm giving you the floor. You're the last speaker, and we have great expectations.
Right. Well, Christine, thank you very much. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Emmanuel very much for organizing this One Planet Summit, because I think it's an absolutely crucial subject. Because after all, we're making a lot of progress as humanity in finding the technological solutions to tackle climate change and to reduce carbon. And clearly there's a huge amount still to do, but we're starting to see a way forward since the Paris Summit 5 years ago, which was, I think, a great success. We can see that humanity can do this. But the problem is that we are destroying species and habitat at an absolutely unconscionable rate. I think we've lost about 500 species in the last century. Of all the mammals in the world, the biomass of mammals, I think I'm right in saying that 96% of mammals are now either on our planet are now human beings or oxen or pigs or the livestock that human beings rely upon. 70% of all the birds in the world are chickens, Christine. In other words, there has been a total or a near total destruction of wildlife. Only 4% of the mammals in the world are now wild mammals, from whales to monkeys to you name it. And that is, in my view, a disaster. We're seeing a parallel loss of habitat, of forests and plant species of all kinds. So that's why the UK is pledged to protect 30% of our land surface, 30% of our marine surface, to create marine protected areas, vast protected areas, something, by the way, that an objective we share very much with France, with Canada. Glad to see Justin speaking just now. We're all engaged in this same effort. And of the £11.6 billion that we've consecrated to climate finance initiative, we're putting £3 billion to tackling, to protecting nature, whether it's marine life or timber conservation or sustainable food production. But I think that as global leaders, we must go further. And I'm very pleased, therefore, that so many countries have already signed up to the UN Leaders Pledge for Nature, so that we have really hard-edged targets for the preservation and of species and wildlife, but also the rewilding of our planet in the way that Sir David Attenborough has suggested. And I would like to see a world in which we give real meaning to those Aichi targets that were set so many years ago at Kyoto. And I hope that our Chinese colleagues will be pushing that agenda in their biodiversity summit at Kunming. And I know that we will be working with colleagues under the auspices of the UN to do that at the COP26 summit in Glasgow. Obviously, it's right to focus on climate change. Obviously, it's right to cut CO2 emissions, but we won't achieve a real balance with nature unless we, with our planet, unless we protect nature as well. And one final thought: don't forget that the coronavirus pandemic was the product of an imbalance in man's relationship with the natural world, like the original plague that struck the Greeks. I seem to remember in Book 1 of the Iliad, it is a zoonotic disease. It originates from, well, whether it's bats or, I'm winding up, but whether it originates from bats or pangolins, from the demented belief that if you grind up the scales of a pangolin, you will somehow become more potent, or whatever it is that people believe. It originates from this collision between mankind and the natural world, and we've got to stop it. And that's why I think that this summit is so important, and this focus on the natural world and on biodiversity is absolutely critical. Yes, we must tackle climate change. That's absolutely right. But climate change must now be seen as part of an overall agenda to protect the natural world, and I think the One Planet initiative is completely right. Thank you all very much, and thank you to Emmanuel for organizing this summit.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Christine, for moderating this portion. Jean-Pascal, Boris, Justin, Erna, thank you very much for being here and for your commitment. Very quickly, 3 points. I believe land degradation neutrality, that initiative, we need to broaden it. That's very important. Thank you very much to Canada for contributing to the fund and all of the steps that are being taken. Second, the goal of shifting our public investment, 30% of bilateral investment will go towards projects in the field of biodiversity, as well as projects underpinned by nature-based solutions. I think that's something we all have our sights set on, all the way out to 2030. And third, Boris, if you'll agree, in Glasgow, we'll need to take stock, especially on disclosure. With TCFD, we managed to shift private financing, and we need to do the same with TNFD. So, Boris, with your agreement in Glasgow, we'll take stock of what we've achieved, thereby ensuring that the private sector works hand in hand with the public sector on this front. So those are the operational conclusions of this session. Thank you to all three of you for being here via video link. I know it's very early for you in Justin. Thank you very much for being here, for your commitment. Erna, Boris, thank you very much for your steadfast commitment to this topic. You are truly pioneers, especially Erna, who's been working on this for a long time. And this brings us nicely into Section 4, protecting tropical forests, species, and human health. Thank you again, Christine. A great deal has already been said. So far, we've all been underscoring the importance of preserving the environment in order to safeguard human health, beefing up ecosystem stability. The Chancellor, Angela Merkel, is here with us today via video link. Germany committed to biodiversity specifically very early on, especially forest biodiversity. It was one of the first European countries spearheading initiatives, allocating substantial resources over the years. Thank you very much, Angela, for being here. Over to you.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, lieber Emanuel.
Well, Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, every day, as we know, natural habitats are destroyed. About 1/4 of most of the animal and plant species are threatened with extinction, and these dramatic losses have grave consequences for the life, for the livelihood, and for the quality of life of also us humans. And this is why we need to step up our efforts to protect biodiversity and natural habitats, and this not just at some point in time, but now, and not just somehow, but considerably. Otherwise, the consequences will very soon be irreversible. And this is why this summit meeting is such an important marker in the run-up to COP15. I'm very pleased to be able to announce for Germany that the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People that was initiated by France and Costa Rica is a coalition that we shall join. Thus, in the run-up to COP15, we will work together to protect 30% of the planet's land and sea. For the purpose of financing such protected areas, we support with the Legacy and Landscapes Fund, developing countries and emerging economies, and I can only encourage others to step up to the plate and to contribute as well. For the forests are of prime importance for the biodiversity and climate protection, and we have to put all our efforts into working against a further deforestation. Together with Norway and the United Kingdom, we have provided $5 billion for the protection of rainforests over the past 5 years. And I also support the Alliance for the protection of rainforests that France initiated in 2019. And I'm obviously very pleased that under the German chairmanship, the Amsterdam Partnership has taken a clear stance for a deforestation-free, sustainable supply chain for agricultural commodities. Forest protection also means health protection, or to put it differently, humans increase the risk of infections with pathogens when they destroy forests, when natural habitats are carved up, or hitherto pristine ecosystems are used. And we human beings can only live well on a healthy planet with a healthy flora and fauna. And that is the essence of the One Health approach. We, together with France, initiated the One Health High-Level Expert Council. It promotes cooperation among WHO, FAO, the World Organization for Animal Health, and UNEP. And it was also of prime importance to launch a wildlife trafficking alliance in order to counteract direct infection of pathogens transmitted from wild animals to humans. We all know how important this is, and no doubt about it, if we really care about our health, if we really cared about this, we need to resolutely protect nature and biodiversity, and this is why I wish every success to this summit. We all need it urgently. I would like to thank all of you for your efforts and join you to continue those efforts. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you, Madam Chancellor. I also wish to hail the announcements that you've made, which help to structure our various work streams we've been talking about. I also wanted to say that we are going to be contributing to Germany's initiatives, the initiative for the fund. We will stand with you shoulder to shoulder, Germany. Thank you for taking those initiatives. I would now like to hand over to the Charles Michel, President of the European Council. We know that he's very committed across all of these topics. He's been working hard to mobilize the Council and all of our colleagues through that Council. Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And also thank you for this initiative, which is absolutely vital. After all, biodiversity lies at the heart of this project, and I believe that if we work hand in hand in the spirit of international cooperation, we'll be able to protect our environment and our health. Just a couple of points from me. First and foremost, we're all well aware, and this is something COVID-19 has thrown into stark relief, the link between the loss of biodiversity, the development of zoonoses, and we know to what extent trafficking in animal species and wildlife contributes to these problems. 1.6 million viruses have not yet been detected, but they encapsulate this link between human and animal species. The first thing I wanted to say has to do with forests. It's essential that we don't forget that 30% of the Earth's surface is covered by forests. These forests account for 80% of our biodiversity, and therefore there's a serious challenge here. The challenge being for us to mobilize, to band together so that we protect forests and manage them in a sustainable fashion. Within the European framework, there is, of course, a great deal that can be done via international cooperation for development. The European Union is, of course, doing a great deal on international development so as to lend support for public health systems. This is a common objective. On the other hand, there is also a very specific challenge specific to Africa, but it goes beyond that. That is forest management. The EU, within the EU, we have made commitments as part of our strategy out to 2030. We committed ourselves to protecting primeval forests. Also, we plan to plant 3 billion trees by 2030, and that sends a strong signal. Also with a view to developing protected areas. 2 more points. First of all, we do want to whip up additional political will. This is a key topic. Many of the previous speakers mentioned this, so I won't be delving into the details. The Aichi targets, those 20 targets, need to be our lodestars. And last but not least, I wish to seize this opportunity. And in fact, I mentioned this at the G20 and in bilateral talks with many of you. The need for an international treaty with a view to preventing the outbreak of pandemics and to help manage pandemics once they arise. We need to exchange data, exchange information. And in fact, this is something I spoke about at length with Tedros. Thank you very much, Tedros, for your commitment. Boris Johnson also, during the G7 presidency, we discussed this. This could be an additional driver so that we can work in the spirit of cooperation and come up with the concrete treaty drawing on the lessons of this crisis, the COVID-19 crisis. That's all I wanted to say today. Once again, thank you very much to all of the friends here around the table. Thank you, France. Thank you to the French President for launching this initiative. You can count on the European Union as we seek to make progress on this front, cooperating and confronting this challenge. Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you for your commitment for this initiative. And the last suggestion you made brings us nicely to the Director General of the WHO from the vantage point of One Health and the establishment of a council on this topic, specifically on the link between all of the themes mentioned by Chancellor Merkel. You have the floor, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le...
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
And thank you so much for your leadership and partnership today and during the past year. Thank you also to Your Excellency Angela Merkel for your leadership and partnership. Your Excellency Felix Tshisekedi, Your Excellency Mark Rutte, Your Excellency Pascal Canfin, Your Excellency Charlie Michel. Michel, by the way, the idea of pandemic treaty is a very good idea, as we have discussed, and thank you so much for bringing this idea. And Mr. Chu Dongyu, Mr. Marco Lambertini, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. In the past 2 months, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us all many lessons. One of the most important is that the health of humans, animals, and the planet that sustains us are intimately linked. More than 70% of emerging diseases discovered in recent years are linked to animal to human transmission. We have one planet and one health. There are 3 areas in which WHO is working to promote a One Health approach. First, a stronger policy for One Health. In May last year, WHO published our manifesto for a healthy and green recovery, with 6 policy prescriptions and more than 80 specific actions to protect nature, invest in water and sanitation and clean energy, promote sustainable food systems, build healthier cities, and reduce polluting activities. Second, a stronger approach to One Health. Through our 150 country offices, we're working to strengthen country-level mechanisms and capacity to implement a One Health approach. And we're working on early warning systems that integrate human, animal, and environmental surveillance and monitoring. And third, stronger partnership for One Health. Major health challenges, including antimicrobial resistance, food safety, and pandemic preparedness, cannot be effectively addressed by one sector alone. That's why the tripartite was formed between the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the World Organization for Animal Health, and WHO, as indicated by Chancellor Merkel. Together with our partners in the tripartite and UN environment, we have now agreed to establish a One Health high-level expert council supported by a joint secretariat. And thank you to France and Germany for this proposal. The council will analyze scientific evidence and policy responses in countries and advise us on actions to take and recommendations to develop. Together, we are now working to establish a supportive mechanism for the Council and expect the first meeting by the World Health Assembly in May. My sisters and brothers, we live in an ever-changing world. This will not be the last outbreak of a zoonotic disease, but with stronger policy, a stronger approach, and stronger partnership for One Health, we can prevent, prepare for, and mitigate the impact of future outbreaks of zoonotic diseases and make our world healthier, safer, fairer, and more sustainable for everyone. President Macron, thank you so much again for your leadership. I thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Tedros, for your contribution and your commitment. We see how this implementation on One Health is going to be structured. I'd also like to say that our summit is also an opportunity to launch the PRESOLD initiative by French business on limiting future epidemics. That was the initiative that President van der Leyen welcomed earlier. And she also mentioned Europe's commitment to try to better coordinate international research being done in this field. This is complementary to One Health, which is meant precisely to coordinate our world agendas, but PRESOLD is going to support observation networks in terms of animal, human, and environmental health so as to identify the risks that are meant to be reduced with a direct link to countries concerned. And I'd like to thank the European Commission and also the FAO for their very strong involvement in this initiative, as well as all the research bodies that have also been involved and thought out this initiative. So this is the perfect transition to give the floor to the Director General of the FAO, Q Dong-yu, precisely on this initiative, but also so as to talk about the link between health and the environment. Director General, you have the floor, sir.
On ne vous entend pas. You should be on mute.
Yes?
This is good. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Thank
this
you.
is good.
Your Excellencies, Mr. President Macron and Chancellor Merkel, thank you for your leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As government are negotiating the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, FAO is committed to continue supporting the mainstreaming of biodiversity across the agriculture and food sector by hand-in-hand initiative. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the close linkage between human, animal, and environmental health. In a context of increased human, livestock, and wildlife contacts and ecosystem degradation, FAO recognizes the importance of environmental sustainability as the key determinant of long-term One Health for all. We need to do more, all for One Health. FAO has been promoting the International B-Day for Biodiversity. FAO strongly supported the creation of the One Health high-level expert council tasked with collective and disseminating information on this interconnection with the context of biodiversity erosion. This must involve addressing inequality in health, as there can be no health security if vulnerable in the rural areas are left behind. We have intensified work at the interface of One Health and ecosystem restoration, and therefore welcome the PRESOLD, Preventing Zoonotic Diseases Emergence Program. PRESOLD can count on FAO field work and experience globally. We have 194 members throughout the One Health ECOTAC network of over 400 animal health experts working in 36 Africa, Asian countries through our reference centers, laboratory surveillance program. Together with the new PRESOLD initiative, with very much appreciate the leadership of France and Germany. So we will provide over $100 million of support on zoonotic disease surveillance to over 100 national animal health laboratories in 2021 to 2023. Finally, we offer using the new joint FAO, WHO, and FAO and IAEA centers as a support for harbors, for science policy dialogue, enabling the work of a high-level expertise council on One Health to guide the science and the centers to act as a platform for better uptaking of scientific outcome for policy decisions. The world needs One Health for all, by all for one healthy planet. Let's do it historically, holistically, coherently, and collectively. And thank you all.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Directeur Général.
Thank you so much, Director General. Here we see the consistency of our international agenda on the subjects of human health, biodiversity, and so forth. Thank you very much for the role you play. And now, on the basis of what we have already seen here, we're going to need to step up our fight against deforestation. This is something that had been mentioned several times. It's a key element, both in terms of prevention of certain pandemics of animal origin, but also so as to strengthen biodiversity. And this is the last action or activity on which today's agenda will concentrate in this particular sequence. And that will be the roundtable on deforestation. So I would suggest that we see a short video on the Alliance for the Preservation of Tropical Forest. I will be giving the floor to Minister Pompili to moderate this roundtable.
Wildfires aggravated by climate change, the growing pressure of human activity, intensive farming. The world's forests have diminished by almost 100 million hectares in 20 years. Under particular threat are the tropical rainforests, and with them, inestimable reservoirs of biodiversity, which is critical for research and for indigenous communities. Based on this evidence, and while the Amazon was victim of vast wildfires, in August 2019 in Biarritz, the G7 decided to act and released an emergency aid. The Alliance for the Conservation of Rainforests is launched. Its aim, to establish the international governance of tropical rainforests involving political leaders, civil society, and research. At the height of the COVID crisis, a reminder of the link between deforestation, protection of natural habitats, and human health, the Alliance started to act. In practice, $500 million in funding have been released to support initiatives such as the NGO Conservation International's Our Future Forests, a project to preserve 72.5 million hectares in 7 countries in South America by 2025 in consultation with indigenous communities. Another illustration of further international governance is the launching of Tropisco, a unique project for monitoring deforestation. Tropisco is an initiative launched by the Space Climate Observatory, which was created by the One Planet Summit in 2017. It relies on images from the European satellites Copernicus and will be able to map deforestation weekly. The project will localize affected areas in real time with unparalleled precision, thus enabling the common mobilization to fight deforestation. Country leaders, international organizations, NGOs, and corporations will be able to act in real time, from launching alerts to immediate action on the spot, to fighting what causes deforestation in the long run.
Les interventions précédentes.
Previous speeches have already shown, I think, that the fight against deforestation is going to be a major issue in years to come. Quite simply because it's a place where different challenges come together. Contact between wild fauna and people coming from penetration of human into areas rich in biodiversity such as forests can lead to zoonotic diseases. You said earlier that the immense majority of species live in forests. However, for at least 3 decades, we have seen a very deeply disturbing level of deforestation. And what is done in Europe and North America does not compensate for the loss of tropical forest, which must absolutely be protected. France has committed itself to a strategy to combat imported deforestation. And to that end, today, we find ourselves in the presence of Mr. Félix Tshisekedi, who is President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Mr. Mark Rutte, who is Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mr. Pascal Canfin, President of the Environment Committee of the European Parliament, and Mr. Marco Lambertini, who is President of WWF International. I should like, first of all, to give the floor to Mark Rutte. Prime Minister, what role the policies concerning responsible corporate governance play so as to avoid imported deforestation? And what are the Netherlands doing to that end? You have the floor, sir.
Yes, well, thank you so much. And let me say that we, here in the Netherlands, we adhere to the OECD guidelines and the UN guiding principles. And so what that means is that we expect companies to conduct due diligence in their supply chains. And this means that companies should identify, they should mitigate, and of course also account for risks to people and the environment, including when it comes to this overly important subject of deforestation. We recently renewed our policies on this, particularly on the responsible business conduct, which proposes a smart mix of measures. And the main element here, I would like to stress, is due diligence legislation, which should ensure action is taken by those who are currently lagging behind. I think this shows we, here in the Netherlands, we are firm advocates of introducing this legislation at the level of the European Union, because we will believe that that will increase the impact and create a level playing field for all businesses. So, succinct answer to your question.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Rutte, for telling us about the prospects for us fighting against imported deforestation. This has been translated into a number of initiatives, such as the declaration that came out of the Amsterdam meeting in 2020, setting our sights on the next 5 years. I'd now like to hand over to Mr. Tshisekedi, President of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In your opinion, what role can producer countries play in facilitating the establishment of sustainable value chains? It seems that your microphone is muted. Is that better? Yes, we can hear you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I should like to extend my gratitude to the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel, thank you very much for inviting me. My comments are going to focus on two principles, and the commitments of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, in the field of tropical forests. Legal, political, and socio-cultural commitments will be mentioned. First of all, changes in land use have resulted in loss of habitat, land degradation, soil erosion, a reduction in drinking water stocks, and more carbon emissions into the atmosphere. Thus, the DRC decided to beef up the legal framework for protecting forests, thereby helping to fight deforestation. We have set up a forestry charter which lays down the principles for sustainable management of forests. This guarantees that local communities, that shareholders have the right to access forests and trees. This will help us not only to scale back poverty, but is also a long-term solution for forest management. In order to further propel us towards the environmental transition and to combat deforestation, we've just set up an agency that will focus on sustainable development and the environmental transition. The Democratic Republic of Congo has 155 million hectares of forests on its territory. That's 10% of global tropical forests and 47% of Africa's tropical forests. Thus, we have myriad plants, a great wealth of resources. As a result, we have developed policies aimed at combating the cutting down of trees so as to prevent land degradation and biodiversity loss. For instance, we've invested in the establishment and preservation of protected areas, which cover 14% of our territory. We hope to increase that to 17% by the year 2030. So there you have it, in a nutshell, what we're doing on this front. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for this vital contribution from a producer country like the DRC. You are managing deforestation at its source, there where primary materials are produced. France, as you know, has adopted a roadmap on collaboration with the key producer countries. The overarching objective is to help producer countries as they transition towards sustainable production. I'd now like to hand over to Marco Lambertini, president of the World Wildlife Fund International. As you know, natural materials consumed throughout the world have contributed to deforestation. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Thank you very much, Madam Minister, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen.
Been taking nature for granted. And at last, in the face of today's nature and climate crisis, are beginning to fully understand the disastrous consequences that this is having on our society, economy, well-being, health. Let me add a couple of figures to the one already mentioned today. A recent report, ILO and WWF, has highlighted that nearly half of the global workforce depends on healthy natural systems. And the World Economic Forum has ranked biodiversity and ecosystem loss on the top 5 global risks for society and economy. And on a more general point, we should celebrate the fact that on climate, we have set the world compass towards achieving by 2050 net zero emissions, carbon neutrality. We need a similar ambitious goal for nature. Zero net loss of nature by 2030 has to be the common and minimum goal for all of us, government, business, consumers, to achieve by 2030, and drive actions in the same direction towards a nature-positive future. As been mentioned already, the COVID crisis has highlighted our broken relationship with nature. There was recently an interview to the doctor who discovered the Ebola virus, saying that in his research, he's found very clearly that the next virus potentially driving a pandemic is in the waiting. And 3 in 4 new human infectious diseases outbreaks are actually coming already from animals. So we know, and we mentioned, that wildlife trade is somehow the highway for viruses to move from forests to cities and infect millions. We mentioned the fact that we need to rethink the way of how we farm animals. But deforestation is a fundamental driver of infectious diseases as well. And it does open up spaces, it does allow wildlife trade to happen, and it displaces animals, so creating a greater exposure of humans to wild animals potentially carrying viruses. But it's also true to say, and we need to recognize that keeping forests standing until now is proving pretty hard. Many commitments from governments and companies so far has fallen short, and so we need to think differently. What can we do? What has to change? First of all, there is an urgent need to transform the way we produce and consume food. Food today is responsible for 80% of deforestation globally, particularly commodities like beef, soy, palm oil, when unsustainably or illegally produced, are driving 80% of global deforestation today. The initiative that was mentioned by the Prime Minister of the Netherlands and the imported deforestation law in the European Union is a great example of how to tackle this. Imported deforestation is the deforestation that we import by importing commodities that are driving deforestation elsewhere. The second point is government recognition of indigenous people rights and responsibilities and their traditional way of life. And also channeling finance to support the livelihoods of smallholders. This is a critical dimension of the fight against deforestation. through payment and incentives schemes, but also technology, training, and social enterprises, sustainable finance in different ways. Canada, Costa Rica have shown great leadership in these areas. Protecting and managing sustainably nature is not an option, it's the only option. We heard several times today, because finally we're beginning to understand that this is a massive cultural evolution in our civilization, that we depend on nature more than nature depends on us. Let me thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you, and let's unite to reverse nature loss and restore nature by 2030, so that by the end of the decade, we can actually celebrate more nature, not less, on the planet. Thank you very much. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lambertini, for that edifying speech. We do depend on nature, and we do have to mobilize all forces so that we shift to sustainable consumption and production. And now, Mr. Pascal Canfin, who's going to tell us about imported deforestation at the European level from the perspective of the European Union and the European Committee for the Environment. What are the priorities in terms of combating deforestation in the EU, and what advances are on the cards? Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. President, distinguished participants in this panel. As you know, in Europe, we are involved in a process of profound transformation of our public policies. The Green Deal. As part of this Green Deal, we're working on the climate, but also biodiversity. Not only on European soil, but as has just been said, biodiversity can also be defined as the impact of what we import. In Europe, of course, very little coffee, palm oil, chocolate, soy. Very little of that is grown on European soil, so we import these products. As a result, Europeans are the world's top contributors to imported deforestation, and this is incompatible with the targets we've set out for ourselves. That's why in June of 2021, the European Commission will be introducing the first European law aimed at putting an end to imported deforestation resulted from agricultural raw materials, just like the ones I mentioned. How did we achieve this? Well, we worked in conjunction with companies. We've been doing this for a number of years, since 2014, and many of these companies have committed themselves to guaranteeing their clients, guaranteeing their consumers that their products have not resulted in any deforestation. And of course, these are but drops. These are but drops in the ocean of efforts aimed at combating deforestation. Therefore, we need to step by step reduce market access for companies which cannot guarantee the fact that they're not contributing to deforestation. In concrete terms, and in fact, this was showcased in the video we saw a few minutes ago, we have GPS technology, we have the satellites which can track down to the land plot, down to the hectare, where what is produced in terms of our imports. So we have all of these technologies at our disposal, and we rich countries are in fact financing the development of these technologies. We're going to use them now to trace deforestation. So if a company is unable to prove that its primary resources are sourced in a sustainable fashion, well, that company will no longer have access to the European market. Last but not least, trade agreements. This process has received a great deal of support from the European Commission, France, and the Netherlands. We want to change the rules of the game for trade agreements. In other words, when we trade with a country, when we import goods or raw materials, we want guarantees that it does not come at the price of deforestation. We want to do this in conjunction with our partners. We don't want to impose sanctions on our partners. We know that there are development challenges, other challenges, but as has already been said, We cannot simply proceed with business as usual. So these are two specific examples I wanted to tell you about. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all four of you. Thank you, Madam Minister, for moderating. Felix, President of the DRC, thank you very much for your commitment within the Alliance for the Protection of Tropical Forests. It's absolutely vital. Thank you, Mr. Lambertini. The report, the course you've charted is essential. Also, Prime Minister Mark Rutte, a great friend. Thank you very much for taking the floor. Also, Pascal Canfin. You've all reminded us of the European dimension to the fight of imported deforestation. So, what do we have to do? Well, on the first hand, we have to clarify what's being done. We need to ensure that our agricultural policies, other policies, are fully in keeping with our objectives, because we import a great deal of goods, including protein, which their production results in deforestation in many countries. So we need to ensure that we reduce this trend, these kinds of imports, but we also must keep in mind that we can work in hand with our African partners, because what we should be seeking to do is reducing our dependence on proteins which result in deforestation, but at the same time, we need to adopt strategies which promote agroecology. So that's how the deforestation agenda dovetails nicely with the Great Green Wall, which we talked about earlier. So I'm very pleased that we have both components of the strategy brought together. It is now time for me to make some concluding remarks, but just before I do so, we're going to play a short video, Leaders Pledge for Nature, and then I will summarize today's event in just a few moments' time.
There's been an aggressive increase in deforestation.
Illegal hunting and animal trade, including online sales.
Equivocal evidence of climate change.
There are fears that the coronavirus outbreak could become a pandemic. First responders are battling unprecedented wildfires.
Well, the vaccine cannot come fast enough as the
Coronavirus cases in Africa.
South Korea, Iran, and Italy.
A full-blown global pandemic.
The decisions we take over the next decade will determine the fate not only of the world's biodiversity, but also the fate of us all.
I endorse the Leaders' Pledge for Nature.
I endorse the Leaders' Pledge for Nature.
I endorse the Leaders' Pledge for Nature.
I endorse the Leaders'
Pledge for Nature.
And commit to take urgent actions.
Urgent actions.
Urgent actions.
So that united,
we can reverse biodiversity loss
by 2030.
By 2030.
For sustainable development.
Voilà, nous arrivons à la conclusion.
Right, so we are coming to the end of this One Planet Summit, and so it is now my job to thank you all. Thank you for all of you, those who are here physically, heads of state and government, and also the international organizations. And I would also like to thank civil society and also those who have joined us via video and have been online with us. I would like to thank Monique Barbu for all the work that she has put in, as well as her team, And thank you to our teams at the Élysée and in the ministries for preparing this very important summit. Now, we haven't been able to cover a lot of topics because that would have been impossible. Of course, we need to also talk about water, amongst others. But I believe that thanks to your commitment and thanks to the work done by all the teams, your teams, our teams, a lot has been announced and has taken concrete shape this time, a lot more than what we would have expected a few months ago. This just shows that the agenda is now mature and we're ready to act. When I sent my New Year's greetings to the French citizens at the beginning of the year, I said we need to prepare for 2030. We need to prepare France for 2030, Europe and Africa, and the world in 2030. So we need to take actions now that will help us to change the world and make it better by 2030. Now, of course, there are people who say that these summits are of no use, that it's just a lot of theory. And a lot of people say we're all going to die anyway and everything is going to collapse, and people actually take advantage of this rhetoric. But I believe that it is possible to change things, but we can't do everything overnight. This requires concrete action in the field, and I would really like to thank the work of all the associations working in the field, agroecology, green finance. They are the real pioneers here. And I think that it is really thanks to the commitments that we have taken today that we will move forward. The international system works very slowly. It is a thankless process, and I tend to agree to some extent, but we need to change our habitudes, shake things up a little bit. And I think that if we have the right level of representation, the right mobilization, if we're specific, if we're concrete with dates and figures, we will ultimately reach our objectives. This is exactly what we're doing today and what we've been doing for the last 3 years with the One Planet Summit, because there are clear milestones, transparency, accountability. So what has been decided today is to be pursued with a lot of determination, humility, and transparency. So first of all, the protection of land and marine ecosystems. So we have enlarged the alliance. 50 members are now engaged in a coalition aimed at protecting 30% of the planet, both land and sea, by 2030. We're going to step up our efforts in the months to come in order to reach a decisive, concrete, and verifiable target in Kunming, and that is going to be our objective at the end of the year. We have also made a very strong commitment by an initiative to protect the Mediterranean, develop networks, marine protected areas, put an end to overfishing, combat marine pollution. And once again, we have a very important event in Marseille, where we'll be able to provide support to this initiative and obtain preliminary results with states, regional, local actors, and civil society. There is also the World Conservation Congress that will be held in Marseille, and I would like to thank the IUCN chair and the mayor of Marseille, who is with us. Maybe he would like to say a word on this aspect of marine protected areas. Would you like to say something on marine protection in general? Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you very much to the President of the IUCN for having selected Marseille for this World Conservation Congress. I'm very eager to welcome all of you in Marseille, which is a city which has been declared as a climate emergency. It has a beautiful wealth of natural resources, the Calanque in particular, and we hope that all of us can grow together, both humans and nature. So I would like to say, see you in September in Marseille. Thank you very much, says the President. I miss Marseille very much, and I'm sure I'll be delighted, as many others around this table, to go to Marseille very soon. All of you are very welcome indeed, says the mayor. You might even, if you're lucky, be able to watch a football match while you're there. Okay. I'll take you up on that. Thank you very much. Mr. President, very briefly, Thank you very much. Thank you for all the preparation, postponement. France has always supported us. The French teams have always been with us. So thank you very much to France, and welcome to the Congress in Marseille. Okay, so Marseille is going to be an important milestone where we will take responsibility and mainly take stock. As to the promotion of agroecology, we are taking note that there is an unprecedented acceleration of the Great Green Wall project with mobilization of 14 billion euros in international finance in 11 countries. And then there is also a lot that has been done within the I Am Africa International Agroecological Movement for Africa Charter. A lot has been done. And we have spoken with the Mauritanian president. We have a very important event that is the Africa-France Summit in Montpellier, and the accelerator will help us to take stock on the 5 pillars regularly. And during the UN General Assembly and during the French presidency of the European Union, we will take stock of the situation as far as the agroecological movement is concerned, not just in Africa, but also in Europe. Third commitment is financing in favor of biodiversity. So there is a strong momentum now that will grow, including public donors, businesses, fund managers. There's the Alliance for Investment in Natural Capital, supported by the Prince of Wales, bringing together actors in the field of finance in order to invest further in the restoration of biodiversity. Thank you very much for joining us. And the objective is to mobilize $10 billion for nature in the next 2 years. So this is not a long-term target. We're talking about in the next 2 years, $10 billion in the next 2 years. And I think we even better we simplify our roles and work better together. Then there is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, the TNFD, which is the TCFD of biodiversity, which will help us to draw up a framework to measure risks, impacts, and benefits of economic activities on biodiversity in order to have a transparent framework for businesses and for financial institutions. So we will work with asset managers, private equity funds, banks, insurance companies to have clear measures, a sort of a taxonomy to engage more financial resources. We need to make sure that the constraints and the risks are supported both by public and private sector. Then there's the Coalition for the Convergence of Financing in Favor of the Climate and Biodiversity in order to create more synergies. The objective has been supported and endorsed by France. This is also to reach the 30% target by 2030. And I would like to thank the director of the AFD, the French Development Agency, present here. Then there were other engagements made this afternoon on the protection of forest species and human health. So there is the initiative PREZODE, Preventing Zoonotic Diseases Emergence, which will be an unprecedented cooperation at the international level between different players, researchers, health watchdog networks, etc., to prevent new pandemics from occurring through animal pools. And once again, I would like to thank the people present here today who have launched this initiative. It mobilizes 400 researchers in human health, animal health, and the environment at the international level. So we will measure the progress achieved during the World Conservation Congress in Marseille. We heard what the WHO had planned, and we know what their agenda is now as well. So for all these themes, and I would just like to say that there is also the fact that we're going to pursue our fight against deforestation and the Euro-African agenda to combat deforestation. So this is also something that we will look at in Marseille, and President von der Leyen is going to be with us then. So these are all the different engagements that we have made, the commitments that we have made collectively, and I would like to thank everyone who has represented the African continent today. Africa has a lot of in-house solutions, and I believe that it is our role to help them, to help us as well, and to accelerate the deployment of the solutions. And there are a lot of nature-based solutions possible as well. So we need to consolidate everything that we've said. We will deploy it. We will take stock. We will monitor the situation regularly. So as I said, we have to come back together in Montpellier, in Marseille, and the Angers as well, where there will be the convergence of the different COPs. And all this will lead up to Kunming and also Glasgow for the COP26 on climate, which will also be an event where all these different agendas will converge. What is important is also to have the civil society on board, because very often the civil society feels that we are not moving fast enough. And I would like to thank them for not waiting for us, but actually for paving the way for us. And I would like to assure them that we will try to move as fast as possible. Thank you to the PBS, IPBES, which is the IPCC equivalent for biodiversity. Thank you also for all the work that you've done. And all of us have to take our share of responsibility so that together we can move faster and better on these different themes. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for your commitment, and let us pursue our actions and our endeavors together. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear friends.